Chair Cassie, we have a quorum and we're recording.
Thank you. We'll start the meeting here. Are there any comments on the agenda? I'll accept a motion to approve the agenda tonight.
So move.
I'll make the motion. I'll make the motion.
We have first and second. Any? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposition? Abstentions? Motion carries. Do we have any comments on the meeting minutes from November 1st, 2022? I thought so too.
Dean, will you move the microphone to you?
I'll accept a motion to approve the meeting minutes from November 1st, 2022.
Second.
Was there a first?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
And Jeff has a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Is there any public comment today, Lori?
No, there's not.
I'll hand it over to you, Lori, to give us a
Okay.
project update.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, commission members, committee members. We appreciate you guys being here tonight. What we'll try and do is just do a brief overview at each of our committee meetings. And again, it's been about 3 months since our last meeting. So we'll just go over this real quick. So last year, we kicked off this committee March 15th. We held 9 committee meetings last year, and then we did 5 joint work sessions with Planning Commission and City Council. And then, so when we originally started, to begin, we kicked off the project with a lot of public outreach. Anais is here tonight, and she's going to kind of summarize that here in a minute. And then that input was used to develop the 50-year vision statement, which also we will be looking at tonight again. After that, we looked at the housing needs analysis with our consultants from APG MIG. And that provided a 20-year look at land needs for housing. And then related to that, we also had you review the measures to accommodate needed housing memo. That outlined sort of recommended comp plan updates and also looked at some different policies for consideration and updates to the development code. Those were recommendations. We haven't gotten to the actual development of those edits yet. Next, we looked at the economic opportunities analysis with Echo Northwest, and then that looked at the land needs for employment land for a 20-year horizon, just like the housing needs analysis did. And then the EOA also looked at trends in Scappoose and Columbia County employment trends, and it included a discussion of Scappoose's competitive advantages. And then next, so we have our HNA done and our EOA done. And then so the next step is to look at other land needs, which Beth will be talking about this evening. And so we've asked you all to participate so that staff and the consultants can get feedback on the deliverables that we are getting. And then we take your comments and incorporate those into the final drafts of those studies, which we then take for consideration to the Planning Commission and City Council during those joint work sessions. And that's just so that everyone, you know, this committee, Planning Commission, City Council is all on the same page on what they're reviewing and come to an agreement on, so that it just makes our job easier once we go for adoption next year of all the final products. And it just ensures that everyone's having input on this project, so that you know, all of the different groups here represented are reflected in the final products. So again, we appreciate you all being here, and thank you. And I'll kick it off to Beth.
Thank you very much. Pardon me. Here we go. So going over a little bit about following up on what Lori was saying. Here we are in January, and we've got all of the rest of this year scheduled out. We're expecting to be finishing up this project next year, around mid-year. And what we're focused on tonight is the community vision and the 50-year growth opportunities as it relates to other land needs. So we'll describe what that is. What we'll be coming back to you with in March is beginning to evaluate land use efficiency measures. So tonight we'll talk about, well, you probably need an urban growth boundary expansion, and we're talking about urban reserves. We'll talk a little bit more about those in a few minutes. But before you do an urban growth boundary expansion, you need to look at, can you use land within the urban growth boundary a little bit more efficiently? So we'll be working with the recommendations for measures to accommodate needed housing from APG for your housing. And then we'll be talking about some opportunities to manage your commercial land a little differently than you do. That's going to lead us into beginning to talk about urban growth boundary expansion, which will turn into a fairly technical discussion where we're working through the steps with you. Like right now, if you said, we're going to expand the UGB, I've got some guesses, but I don't know. It's going to depend on where the analysis leads us, because there's a very set process for that. And we'll be getting into that more here in June and throughout the rest of the summer. So that's where we're going this year. We'll also be looking at doing updates to your comprehensive plan. So we've got changes to your text based on your housing needs analysis, your economic opportunities analysis, and then changes to your policies. We'll be working on those with you, as well as development code updates. And part of the development code updates, I think, will come out of the measures to accommodate needed housing, as well as some other development code updates that Laurie has in mind. Those are our coming attractions for this year. Any questions before I head on to the next piece? Grills and chills. All right. So today we're going to start off with Anais walking us through revisions to the community vision, and then we'll talk about the other land need, which is also called public and semi-public land need, as well as land needed for housing and employment for the 2043 to 73 period. Because if you remember, we're looking at not just your urban growth boundary, so that's over the next 20 years, but growth over the next 50 years, which is what the 43 to 73 piece is all about. And then we'll talk about next steps. So Anais, do you want to join us up here? And you'll tell me when to move the slides along.
Yeah, you can go ahead and move to the next one. Hi, everyone. It's been a while since I've been here. Happy to see everyone. Yeah, so lots has happened since I've been here last, which I think was maybe last summer. If you recall at that SAC meeting in last summer, we reported back on all of the community engagement and the community outreach that was happening over the course of spring and summer of 2022. We drafted a draft vision statement based on all of that engagement and work that staff and the team did last year. And then we said we'd come back to you with an updated draft vision. We had a really great discussion, I found, at the last SAC meeting about kind of what revisions we want to see to the draft vision statement, et cetera. So since then, we did go back out to the community and just kind of unveil this draft vision. Are we on the right track? What sort of concepts might we be missing or that we want to explore further? So a quick recap. Staff was at the farmers market in July. We had a table there. Also, I know some SAC members did offer to table at the Adventure Festival in September, which got great turnout. And then in addition, we did have an online survey that was available kind of around those two events as well. So if folks weren't engaging at any of the tabling events, there was an online survey as well. And really the purpose, as a reminder of the survey, was not necessarily collecting new ideas about how Scappoose could be better, but rather really reflecting back on the vision statement and getting a pulse on whether or not we were on the right track. I'll note the online survey was in both English and Spanish, so we did get that out in both languages. So next slide. What did we learn? I would say generally speaking, we learned that we're pretty much on the right track. There were a number of key themes that came up through either the conversations that staff had at the tabling or through the online survey. I would say that a lot of the key themes and topics of conversation were actually echoed very much the key themes that we were hearing during the actual visioning phase. I will say that when we were talking through what we had heard and what we had learned from these activities, we definitely saw that there was, conversation definitely focused more on the original questions of, what do we want to see here in Scappoose in 50 years versus commenting specifically on the vision statement. But I think more than anything, it still resulted in some pretty high quality conversations with folks regardless. And also it just really did continue to create a lot of project awareness, kind of bottom line. But things we did here is of course focus on commercial and retail activity, obviously a lot more community amenities and spaces, definitely a lot of conversation around Highway 30 and how to manage Highway 30, some interest in encouraging sustainable development. And yeah, as I mentioned, many comments were captured the themes that were already expressed in the vision, or a lot of the comments we did get were more specific ideas, and those are always really fun to kind of collect because those are really important when we're thinking about developing policy concepts for the comprehensive plan. So we're always sifting through multiple layers and scales of information, and they all fit somewhere. And there's definitely a lot of interesting ideas that came through that we might want to explore in terms of policy ideas that might not necessarily have a role in the vision statement, which is really much more broad. And so you'll see that we've updated the draft vision statement based on this and also the SAC discussion last year. And some of the key changes we saw or we did was rewording some of those planneries type terms, or reorganizing some statements, expanding a list of protected classes that we list in one of the paragraphs, incorporating the concept of resiliency when we're talking about environment, and then also highlighting regional partnerships and collaboration in general.
I have a question. Can you remind me what the planneries question terms were?
Yeah, I can walk through it and I'll show you what we tweaked. Yeah. All right, so I'll walk through the community vision, the updated draft. And so what you'll see in red are essentially the edits that we made. So would you like me to read it out loud? I'm happy to, or do you want me to just kind of go through the major changes?
Go through the major changes and we'll ask if there's any.
Yeah. Great. So we have that concept of collaboration and partnership as an additional sentence in the first paragraph here. As I mentioned, we expanded the list of protected classes to include language and race. We also reorganized the statements here so that we talk about neighborhoods that are nestled or built with the landscape towards the end when we also talk about housing choices. So connecting those two, because I think they were separated in the first draft. So we connected those two concepts. And just a little bit of wording tweaks so that we're not saying the same thing over and over, but the community remains safe, friendly, and accessible for all. Yeah, so that's the major changes for that first paragraph. The second one.
Do we have any, do we have any questions about the first paragraph? I mean, or any ideas or additions? So I did have one myself. I wasn't here when we did this. I think Christine ran that meeting, but I did fill out a survey. But
Thank you.
one comment I did have with the first one was, it's friendly and connected neighborhoods is our main topic there. Scappoose small town feel is enhanced through a connection to people and a celebration of place. One thing that I thought that would be neat, and one thing about this community that I think of is a family. And so I think of Scappoose as a family. We're all connected to each other, and hopefully we work together to get to the end result versus work against each other. And so one of my comments in the survey was, if we it's just a little edit, but Scappoose small town family feel makes us feel like we're all connected together and going in the same direction. So that was one of the edits that I thought it would be nice to make in this.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I do recall one of those first comments that came through. Yeah, I mean, I would, if you'd like to deliberate that with the essay, with the group here tonight, we can certainly continue to make a couple of tweaks. We do speak to family in terms of highlighting the school district, and then, connecting families. But there's definitely room to elevate that if the group would like to.
I think what Pat was saying was we're more than just individual families. It's not just the Kessies, but we as Scappoose are a family.
I would, when you see what's going on in the world, that's just, that was just my only comment.
I'm fine with changing it if the group wants to.
Sure.
It seems positive.
So are we changing the title?
Oh, no, I was just saying Scappoose small town family feel
Great,
was the only edit.
adding it here. Excellent. Okay. Any other?
Any other comments for the first section?
See, there's a hand raised on.
Jennifer?
Yes, I had a comment. One of the city council meetings that I went to talked about the lack of, or that there wasn't enough daycare facilities in the city. And I was wondering if that should be added into community invest in its youth.
Yeah, I guess I would suggest that is actually a pretty important concept. I would suggest that lies as a policy discussion and a policy language, as opposed to calling it out in the vision per se. I think it would probably be under the umbrella of community resources, programs, and amenities. And then further expanding on what that means, including daycare facilities as potentially new comp plan policy amendment.
And Jay?
Scott?
Yeah, I think family is in here enough. I think if you were to put it as Scappoose small town family feeling, that starts feeling exclusionary to me. Like it's only families, and that's.
Are you saying we're excluding those who don't have families?
Like
Correct.
non-traditional families.
And it's family is often in a more common language taken to mean the standard nuclear family. So I think it's better. I think, as somebody had said earlier, that family is built in, and the school district speaks directly to that. But I just wouldn't put it up front like had been suggested.
Any other comments on that?
Brian Rosenthal. I understand the concern that it might be construed in a certain way, but I think we're at the point now that family means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And at least as I see it in this is not talking about parents and two parents with two kids. It's talking about that we're a group that is collectively working forward for our betterment as a community. And so I'd say let's leave it in with the family thing, but if there's strong opposition, whatever, not me.
Yeah, I would say if we were in Portland, I'd agree with you, but Columbia County is pretty conservative on that sort of thing.
Maybe just another word. Oh, the meaning's still the same.
Community.
Like what?
I can't think of a word right now, like community,
Community.
but
What about something like small town family feel is enhanced through a connection to people working together and a celebration of place. I'm trying to get to your idea of people working together.
We
Yeah, I
also
mean,
talk about collaboration and spirit of working together in the second sentence as well. I don't know if that kind of,
what about Scapoose's small town community feel?
there's no, the word community is not in the sentence right now.
Thank you.
Like I said, that was just a comment of mine because for me, a family means we're all working together as a community. And so, but I'm okay if there's opposition to it. I'm okay. So we don't need to edit it, but so any other comments on this?
Did I add community? So small town community feel.
It's fine with me.
Like community.
Does that work for Scott? Does that work for you? Online? Okay. Let's just go with that.
All right. So the next statement or paragraph is about economy. So you'll see no red underlines because we removed a couple of words. In the first iteration, the second sentence, we talked about small locally owned businesses, and the SAC did suggest not necessarily focusing on only small businesses. So we did remove small, but it still kind of has that same sentiment, and at least, we're supporting locally owned businesses. And then in terms of that planneries term that we did remove here, what was it? Third sentence, right? Thank you. About, talking about the quality and character of Scapoose's downtown and heritage industries. We had the term hyper local in that statement, which I think raised a couple of eyebrows. So we did remove it, and it still flows nicely.
Yeah, one question, we talk about a variety of services and retail options in the third line down. I don't know in this day and age what we're gonna do with retail. It's an incredibly difficult to do that. I mean, I guess we can leave it in there, but it's just, I just don't see, I don't know how we're gonna facilitate retail in the world of Amazon.
Well, I think we're always going to have retail.
Yeah.
I mean, we're always going to go to Fred Meyer. I mean, always need something sooner than Amazon can get it to us in 12 hours.
Okay, whatever, leave it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the goal, right? We would like to have a nice downtown walkable,
Yeah.
cute shops and
Shops.
yeah.
If you wanted to, you could just say variety of services and not have and retail options. But
It's, my concern is not that it's anything wrong with having retail in there. My concern is it may be a hill too far to climb. And size of our community and the market forces. I've tried to put retail in multiple times in my buildings and it always fails.
50 years though.
I know.
50 years, it might happen. You
Good.
build it and come.
I hear your concern. I think you've mentioned that as well, just the struggle with retail. I would maybe even lean a bit on Beth to just, what does your EOA suggest? Does this make sense? Should we, as good measure, keep it or?
I would agree to keeping it. You're going to have some amount of retail. There's going to be some retail in the future. It's going to be different than it is now.
I'm fine. That's good.
Scott,
Same sentence, but slightly before that, like, I think there's something just kind of off about saying a mixed use environment draws in locally owned businesses. Drawing in a local business, just, it seems like two different things to me. Either it's a local business or we're trying to draw them in.
maybe is conducive for locally owned businesses?
I mean, the wrong word here is facilitates, but that's kind of what the mixed use environment does. It makes it
Whatever, I just
supports.
wanted to bring it up because that's a disconnect for me.
I think Laurie's suggestion of supports might be a good one.
What would the new,
Oh,
language-
maybe the pedestrian-friendly mixed-use environment supports locally owned businesses that provide a wide variety of services and retail options.
that work? Any other comments? Len?
Oh, okay. Oh, well, I get to sing here too. Okay. I say one of the issues about the locally owned businesses and I mean, we'd all like to have Northwest 23rd and other places where we see all this kind of a homogeneous related process. But the reality of it is it's very expensive. It's very dysfunctional. And the other process is, and I will go back to something I tried to reiterate, is that we need to understand leakage, okay? And the function of business is how many people can spend how much money at the product we're trying to sell, okay? If we're trying to sell balloons at $10 a piece, we're probably not going to do very well. If we're trying to, we have to understand what this community and the amount of people here and the amount of dollars that they spend both here and in Portland have available for capital expenditures. So all of this thing about small businesses, it's a great concept, but the reality of it is it's very, very difficult when you try to look at who's coming here. I mean, Brian, how many new businesses want to jump in your building to do commercial product? Probably not very many today. Okay, I mean, we've been here for a lot of years and we've watched this community grow, but the community growth is not in small businesses and small street scenes. I mean, it would be great to have, you know, 500 people walking up and down the street and buying things at the candy store and the food store and the grocery store and the clothing store and whatever else. We don't have that. We don't have the capacity. The buyers that we deal with go to Portland. They work in Portland. They have 50 times or 100 times as many retailers available to their resource as they do in Scappoose. So if you can name me 10 retailers who want to be in Scappoose, who want to do business, who fit what you guys are considering is your category, I'll be excited, okay? The reality of it is they're not there, okay? They're not there. We do not have this quote unquote super opportunity market. We have a very limited market for people because there are 3,500 to 5,000 people a day leave Scappoose to work in Portland, okay? Portland is a mega center. It's an economic center, and we can never achieve that.
Yep.
So I think the way it's written how it currently is, and I think it might be a little confusing. And how is it a vision the today, or is it vision in 20 years, or vision in 50 years? So sometime today it's going to be different. 20 years from now it's going to be different. 50 years from now it's going to be different. So how are we writing this particular mission state or vision statement?
I think it's,
Right.
I think it's a vision. Like,
Right.
Over the next
We-
50 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Then so why, I know it's not like this today, but if we vision it to be like this 50 years, it could be. So I think we should really focus on what we vision it to be versus what it is today.
I hope that would one day be this.
Maybe correct me if I'm wrong. This isn't even really a vision. This is more aspirational.
Just a
Vision,
vision.
yeah, but I mean, it's more, to me, a vision is going from A to B, and this is how we're going to get there. We have a vision, and then we're going to have an action plan, and we're going to get there. There may not be a way to get there, but we can still have the hopes and dreams, as Christine would say, of it happening. So I'm fine leaving it like this as long as we don't start doing major coded
There's
adjustments.
There's a couple steps in between, actually, and I'm very well versed in this. There's a vision, there are goals, there are policies, and there are objectives. And those are all that's the step down approach of how we.
Right, so if we're going to start trying to do stuff to bring small retail here, I would say, and start adjusting our municipal code to try to force that to happen, I would oppose it because I don't think that's reasonable. I think that we should have it where, so if it's a question of would we like to have it? Yes. But are we going to put a code in that 20% of all mixed use buildings must be retail? That would be terrible. The demand for small commercial space in Scappoose is primarily professional services. And that's the vast majority of small commercial space. You'll see massage therapists, you'll see chiropractors, you'll see lawyers, you'll see, barbers, hairstylists. It's professional service, not retail. But
Brian?
my only concern would be is, are we heading down a path that if we adopt it like this, down the road, are we going to be doing something that's trying to force it?
Brian, I'll point out that what you're talking about is mostly local businesses. So, all the things that you mentioned, those are going to be mostly local businesses. And I would not say that, one, I would think that a policy of the choice of the type that you talked about would be a very bad policy.
Right.
I've seen cities do that and it doesn't work.
Right.
And so you have the choice of how do you implement this in your comprehensive plan, as NIA said, through the goals through your policies, et cetera, and into your development code. It may well be that there's no change in your development code that's necessary from this because your development code isn't creating a barrier to this happening.
Yeah, I don't feel like we have a barrier currently.
So
Minimum size
no.
on commercial spaces or those kinds of things that would inhibit a small business.
Right. And then this committee then would also have input on,
Any-
changes that we're
Okay.
looking at as
That-
well. So it's all, yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Pat?
I think the statement on we're not going to have these retail businesses, I have to look at it and say, retail business comes from somebody with an imagination that they think they have something that they can sell. 20 years ago, did you have that large used car lot at the edge of town? Did you have the second auto parts store? I mean, we add things. You're talking about a food pod. We wouldn't have dreamt of that 20 years ago. So there's going to be different kinds of retail. Yes, we'll need additional services too. But yes.
Matt, do you know how many people go into the thrift store a day? To the senior center thrift store?
No, I don't. But it's quite a number.
A lot.
What I was thinking. Yeah.
Hmm.
I think
That's the largest fundraiser that the senior center has.
Yeah.
And $1,200 a day is not a bad thing.
Nice.
So it's what?
Please make sure
point
you
is
talk
it's
into your
So-
microphones.
I'm trying. My point is, you have to have something that people want to buy, and
Right.
A business that concentrates on commodity items won't ever beat anybody else. And also a business that does, I remember there being a clothing store across the street, and
Mm.
I don't think that had any chance of ever making it.
Oh, who would have thought that video store would work so long? But look at it, it's going strong.
Yeah.
We don't even have VCRs anymore.
So I'm going to bring us back.
Okay.
And say, are there any other changes that are necessary to this part of the vision statement?
So what is that first sentence? So the second sentence was the second sentence.
Pedestrian-friendly mixed-use environment supports locally owned businesses that provide a wide variety of services and retail options.
Sound good? All right, next section.
Okay. I will say, as difficult as it might be to be picking apart and wordsmithing a vision statement, it is important because it does set forward goals and policy concepts in your comprehensive plan, which are what support and implement development code and zoning. So yeah, I think, Jeanette, you were right on target. A vision is charting a path forward. It's kind of what do you want to see here? And then the comprehensive plan, the development code, the zoning, these are all of the tools that we can use in order to slowly start building environments that are conducive to establishing these types of visions. So the vision is an area where we can completely dream big, and then we can think about, okay, what are all the small tiny little steps that need to happen or should happen or could happen in order to make little elements of this viable. So it does fit. Okay, so this last paragraph, second to last, unparalleled access to the great outdoors. We got a comment on just fixing the Crown Z. I think it was CZ, now it is Crown Z Trail. And then we did have a conversation about removing reference to climate. So we included environmental stewardship. And that was a change that the SAC agreed upon at the last meeting.
Any comments on this section?
Great. And then the last one, there were no changes to this last paragraph. Yeah.
On this page, you say walking, pedestrian, and pedestrian. You have bicycle on here twice. We have a very small, it says enhanced transit. And I don't know that that's a city function as much as a county function, but we definitely have people who will need some kind of transit. Not everybody can bicycle or walk to their doctor's office. So yeah, I think a little more accent on transit, if we could get it in somewhere.
So right now we say, along with enhanced transit, local trail systems blend with the ped bike network, promoting transportation options across town for safe, accessible, and enjoyable for all.
I think it's kind of the same thing as retail. We're aspiring to have transit.
I'm saying we need
Yes,
transit.
absolutely.
So
We'll
that
put it
should
in the
be in
code.
here that transit will be here in 50 years, just to give us an accent that, hey, we would like to, we would imagine that eventually we will have.
Well, along with enhanced transit.
Patricia, maybe what you want is under the sentence that says geographic barriers like the railroad and Highway 30 are overcome through safety improvements and upgraded pedestrian and bicycle facilities. Maybe right there, what you're looking for is adding in enhanced transit so that it's mentioned there. Perhaps that's what you want.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, and then we do have along with enhanced transit shortly thereafter. So way to change that.
Maybe that's more where we talk about enhanced transit. And then the last sentence is about local trail systems blend with the pedestrian and bicycle network. And maybe that's pedestrian and transit network or something like that.
So it would say geographic barriers like the railroad and Highway 30 are overcome through safety improvements, upgraded pedestrian and bicycle facilities, and enhanced transit that provides safe and efficient travel routes. Local trail systems blend with the pedestrian bicycle network, promoting transportation options across town that are safe, accessible, and enjoyable for all.
Yeah, does that sound good?
Up and east. Oh, Lynn has a question.
Len?
I don't mean to be in opposition to this, but if any of you have followed the next project is 1,800 to 2,500 employees at Clascanine to build a oil processing plant. Now, if you look at the housing availability, Clatskanie, Rainier, Longview, none of them are going to be equipped to handle that. Therefore, that particular transportation load, which is about 10 to 15% of the existing traffic on US 30, will now become predominant. I can't predict if next is going to be approved, but if it is, then we have to consider it in our process. We can't just ignore the fact that here's this traffic monstrosity. Okay, that means there's another 1,500 or 2,000 cars up US 30 in the morning and another 1,500 or 2,000 cars down US 30 in the afternoon. We have to be pragmatic enough.
Are you thinking that the labor pool for next is going to come out of the Portland market?
Yes, I would guess that probably 75 to 80% will come out of the Portland market. Okay, I mean there are not enough skilled population in Scappoose, Rainier, Longview, whatever, to build an oil production plant. That's an entirely different, highly sophisticated process. I mean, the biggest issue that goes on right now in Clatskanie is trying to figure out what they can do about housing, what they can do about services, because if that next shows up, it's going to be a monstrosity. Okay, it is going to be an economic monstrosity, and it's in the application process. It's in the community, so we can't just say, "Well, that's not our problem." That is our problem. They're going to be driving through our town every day, both ways, changing the traffic pattern. Okay, that's the issue. So don't think that the infrastructure issues are resolved. They're just beginning.
Jeanette?
I was gonna say, they also have options of Longview, that area, so I feel like it's not gonna all come from the south. I think it's gonna come a lot from the north.
I think it'll come a lot from
From the north,
From
it makes more
Astoria.
sense, but just, so, I mean, there probably is, but that's just with growth in general, but, I mean, I see your point, but I think that a lot of them will come from the north as well.
Right.
I think there's a good chance the next project will go through. I think it'll be positive for the county, but I don't think it's relevant to this discussion because the construction phase is going to happen long before we could even ever deal with these issues. So it's going to be one of those deals that we just do the best we can with what we got. Once they're actually up and running, assuming they do build out, it's a couple hundred employees, so the impact will be minimal. So I think there's nothing really to be planned. I mean, hopefully down the road, when they get a little closer, if this looks like it's happening, they'll start thinking about, setting up some temporary housing out in the Clatskanie area and those kinds of things to reduce impacts and make it more efficient. But I don't think it's going to be, the construction phase is really something for this discussion because this is a 50-year vision, not a 2-year plan.
And Jay?
Paul Vogel.
Yeah, Brian just said much of what I was going to say. The 2,000 or so workers, really, they're phased through the construction period. That's about 3 years. We've got transportation studies, we've got housing studies underway, temporary housing programs getting underway, and that is near enough term that it really isn't a blip on the 50-year vision screen. And I look at the vision statement as really a vision statement, not policy. We're not trying to make policy here. But in terms of the timing and the temporary nature of the large influx of workers, most of whom they have been charted and mapped out of Southwest Washington, actually. Probably not the biggest consideration tonight, in my view.
And Jay?
Debbie Jacob.
Yeah, in light of what Len was concerned about, before the development occurs with next renewable, there will be traffic impact analysis done. So that will help address a lot of these concerns for where the traffic is coming from, what kind of impact this will have on the transportation networks, the multimodal transportation network, because next renewable will be rail as well as road and Ocean River.
So it'd be multimodal. So again, that will be taken care of during the site design review, should the proposal go through and everything like that. But again, like Paul was saying, this is not for policy. This is, I think this is a strong vision statement for Scappoose. And I think it's admirable to keep it in. That's it.
Okay. One of the things that I had on this was with regard to 50 years from now is just a endless clean water supply. I'm not sure if that's a policy, it's something, you know, it's more of a policy than is a vision, but I think about 50 years from now, where water is going to be in parts of the world without clean water. And I know here we're trying to build more wells, and it might be an aspirational thing as well. But anyway, that's one of the things, that was one of my comments from the survey. I don't know if it ever got to you.
Yeah, thank you. I would think that would be quite pertinent for a goal statement or a policy concept in the comp plan. Yeah.
I would
I mean, unless the SAC would like to deliberate that further.
Yeah, what I was thinking, if it is something that we'd want to have aspirational here, I would put it, Scappoose boasts an endless clean water supply with modern and reliable public facilities and services that support carefully planned growth. That's where I would put it. Any other comments on that?
I think that falls under infrastructure improvements are built in tandem with development. Because water supply is an infrastructure. It's like sewer is. Or roads or your electric or.
For sure,
whatever.
100%. Pat, do you think it should be in this vision statement?
I don't think it should be in this paragraph. Maybe the paragraph above.
Is it saying that we don't have it now?
We don't have an endless clean water supply right now.
So Chair Cassie, I would stay away from the word endless.
Yeah, I would too.
I would say sufficient or, enough water.
It's aspirational, right?
Endless.
So
What worries me about endless is, do you then attract a water bottling facility? And is that really in the city's best interest?
More
What-
Californians.
I think what Pat's bringing up by this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the impediments in a lot of communities I've built out on the coast over years ago is that insufficient water leads to no development because they'll put a moratorium on development based on lack of water. And so water is definitely a very important thing for economic development. I don't know if that's kind of where your head was, is that somewhere we need to like not end up making a plan, but then not having enough water to facilitate that plan, which then in turn causes the plan to fail.
Brian, that issue is addressed in the economic opportunities analysis
So you
very
feel like it's-
specifically.
Oh, it's good. Okay.
I would say too, just in using the term endless, the city has to apply for water rights. We don't get endless rights. So to say that would be, I think, kind of technically incorrect, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and
Oh, Anise?
no, I think there's a lot of opportunity to unpack that in your comprehensive plan. There's certainly, water is a type of infrastructure. It is also more than just infrastructure. We do speak to it in the paragraph before about just clean waterways. So it does pop up in a variety of different contexts. The comprehensive plan can certainly elevate the importance of water. It can do things like state, explore water wholesale retailers. Like there's a lot of interesting ideas that either you are already doing or you could maybe be doing better, that does elevate the idea or concept of water. And water, yeah, as I mentioned, is a type of infrastructure. Your comprehensive plan does deal with stormwater, wastewater, and water supply. So there is opportunity to say something more poignant about that there.
Glenn, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I had a conversation about a month and a half ago with Rob, who is the general manager of Cal Portland. And we talked about Pit B. And Pit B is now a vacated excavation site for rock mining. And according to the rules for reclamation, they've got like 40 years before they have to do reclamation on Pit B. And so I said, what about the water? And he said, we wouldn't have any problem sharing the water. Okay, so what we have is a 65 or 70 acre site that's 75 or 80 feet deep, which is a lot of water. And it's all groundwater resourced. Okay, so I'm looking and thinking, why doesn't the city talk to Cal Portland about this resource? Because it obviously would meet both the economic resource requirements for the airport industrial area and other areas of the city. I mean, instead of drilling wells that, they drill a well and it doesn't work, they drill a second well, maybe it works, okay? Here's this massive body of water that could, be retained and protected by fences that the city could use. And to me, it's an aberration that we don't, as a community, talk to those kind of industrial resources to see what they could do for us.
Anise?
Yeah, those are all great ideas that could be explored in a policy statement for sure.
I think you'd want the city's public works staff
Certainly.
involved in that before working into policy.
Yeah.
I don't know what the implications of that are.
Or do we know what the quality of the water is, or if there's undocumented?
But I think the long story short is that there are a lot of ideas for how we can move this forward. And I keep going back to the comp plan because that is an element of this work. And as kind of aspirational and broad, this vision statement is, we really do want to be using it as a filter when we start thinking about these policy concepts that we're going to introduce or revise in the comprehensive plan. So the vision statement is really important for that. It's a tool for us so that when we come to you with concepts and ideas to help move this forward, you can look back on this and does it match? Does it make sense? So that's really the importance of this. But yeah, do think about what this means for your comprehensive plan and what opportunity there is to really flesh out some ideas here that are currently lacking in your comp plan and also maybe your zoning and development as a result.
Awesome. Are there any other comments on this last section? Anyone online, NJ? Okay. Any comments overall? All right.
Great. Thank you.
Anais.
Thank you, Anais. I'm going to welcome my coworker, Nicole, back up to the table. And we're going to switch topics again and start talking land need a little bit. You'll see Nicole in upcoming meetings as she worked on the EOA behind the scenes, and she's working on things like the public and semi-public land needs, and we'll be working on the UGB work as well as the comp plan work. So sadly, we will not see Brittany at our future meetings. She has other economic development work to go off and do. I know. What kind of person is
A
she?
great time here.
She did say that. She was sad about that.
It'd be in our vision statement.
And also, everyone, just feel free. This is a good time if you want to grab a water from the break area or there's more food over there. This is a good time to do that transition here.
All right. So I'd like to hop into the discussion of the public and semi-public land needs. We've called these also other land needs. So there are things like that you don't see directly reflected in your residential areas. They aren't housing. They aren't employment in the traditional employment sort of thing. So you've got municipal employment. So the city of Scappoose has a lot of land that is used for different things. So you've got places like City Hall, which have quite a few employees located in City Hall, or the annex where your planners work out of. You also have things like your public works facilities, your wastewater facility, big piece of land, smaller number of employees, or parks, even bigger pieces of land, and people don't necessarily work there, or they don't work there full time. So it's different than other employment needs, is my point. So we've got Columbia County facilities, Port of Columbia County facilities, which are completely different, and then your school district. So those are your municipal type land needs. And then you've got land needs for your parks, your natural areas, and your trails. And then you've got things that are semi-public land needs, like churches and certain types of nonprofits, small selection of types of nonprofits. So we're going to walk through their land needs as we go along. So starting with municipal land needs, we started with discussions with the stakeholders at public agencies and asked them, so are you going to, do you have land that is surplus that you expect to sell over this next 20 years? So do you have land that could be used differently within the urban growth boundary? Are you expecting to expand your facilities in a substantial way? So maybe a small facility expansion that takes like a half an acre or an acre, we don't necessarily know about right now, but might come up over the 20 years. We're trying to understand, do you have big land needs that aren't known? And so the Port of Columbia County itself, and the school district indicated that they are not going to necessarily need new facilities over the next 20 years. I think the port said it might well buy additional land at the airport as it had the opportunity to, but it didn't have specific expansion expectations. And it's also possible that some of the land that the port might buy may contain some of the employment growth that we're expecting. So there's no specific land needs there that we can count on. The school district, I think, has a middle school site that is surplus to need at this point. And what they're planning on doing potentially, maybe, if I'm getting this right, Nicole, they may rebuild on that site. So they may reuse that site. So they're not expecting over the next 20 years. They don't have anything that they say is clearly expected for new land needs. The city of Scappoose, we were able to look out over a longer period of time, and it's reasonable that the city is going to have some new land needs. And what we concluded is the city would need about 31 new acres of land over the next 50 years. And the way we considered this is we looked at the existing number of acres of land per 1,000 people, so 84 acres, and per 1,000 people, that's about 9.5 acres per 1,000. City is not going to necessarily need all, duplicate the number of facilities it's got. It's going to need some new facilities, but not necessarily a whole big new wastewater treatment plant. But the city might need a couple of acres to expand wastewater facilities on in some ways. So we said, okay, what if we assumed that half that, so about 4.8 acres of land per 1,000 new people. And so that's how we got to the estimates for land need over the 2023 to 43 period and 43 to 73 period. And that's how we came to about 31 acres. Now you might say to yourself, hey, the school district's probably going to grow over the next 50 years too. And you might be right, but the requirements for school districts specifying land needs for urban growth boundary expansions is that they have to have a facilities plan. Well, their facilities plan is a 10-year plan. And so that's really all we can seriously consider from the school district, we think, over the next 50 years. It's entirely possible that some piece of land that we, when we establish urban reserves, which remember is land need for the city over the next 50 years, some piece of that land may be something that the school district wants to use and wants to buy. So there may be part of a future UGB expansion, say in 22 years or 33 years or whatever for the school. Or it may be that they buy a piece of land that's somewhere entirely different that they want to bring into the urban growth boundary, because that's the opportunity that they have. And so while we're striving for a 50-year plan, not all of this necessarily fits really nice and squarely into exactly a 50-year plan. So what we can go with is that we think that we can make a reasonable case that the city of Scappoose is going to need 31 acres of land for the next 50 years. And that's the municipal land needs that we know. Are there any questions about that?
Yeah, help me understand this a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The city currently has 84 acres, but isn't about 50 or 60 of it all the reservoir land up on the hill?
Big piece of it is that, and so we're not counting that as something the city's going to need another one of.
Right, but that's,
Land,
Oh, is that parkland?
well, it's
Okay.
both, right?
80 acres.
Yeah, the most 60 acres or ever what it is up on the hill. That's included in that
It's
number.
just under 80 acres, I believe, and that's it's parkland.
Oh, so it is 80 acres. So is that included in the 84?
No,
No.
we've got
This
parks separate.
would be
Okay,
for,
so
like,
that's parks.
office uses,
Oh, okay.
things like that, facilities, but not
Not
like-
parks.
not parks.
So not parks. So what would it include besides administrative offices? What else would it include?
It could include new facilities if the city needed to build a,
We need land to put a well on, if we need,
Yeah.
additional treatment plants,
That kind of thing.
water
So-
tanks, holding tanks,
new public works facility or something like that. Yeah.
It's the number seems on the high side, but it's I mean, we're not using anything like that now. I mean,
Well, you're using about 9.5 acres of land per 1,000 people. So we're figuring about half of that. We've got a little bit around it in here. And that's just for new people. That's not for existing. That's not expansion of existing facilities sorry, it's not expansion of facilities for new and existing people. It's just for the increment of growth, a couple thousand more people.
do you have a lot of land left down by the sewage treatment plant, or is that all land pretty much currently all being used?
it's not all being used.
Okay, so there's additional land there. Thank you.
So the city has 84 acres then excluding reservoir area on the hill use.
And these are our lands that are developed specifically. And then we've got parkland. And so this table, which is a little bit complex, is from the Parks, Trails, and Open Space update that is, I believe, still ongoing. And what it concludes, it's looking at an adopted level of service guideline of acres per 1,000 people for different parklands. So I'll just choose community parks. That adopted guideline is 2 acres per 1,000 people. It explains the existing acreage of 16.6 and the existing level of service, almost 2 acres per 1,000, and the proposed level of service per 1,000 at 2.3, and then the current need in acres. And so the net new need is essentially for 9.5 acres, and the city has that kind of land already, if I'm understanding this correctly. And so for all of these different park types, the city has enough land to accommodate the expected growth in parks over the next 20 years. And why we've chosen a 20-year period is this is from a parks facility plan for 20 years of growth. And so if you have detailed questions about this, we might need to take those questions to the actual planners of this. All right, so I'm going to go on to then semi-public needs. So I'll use churches as our best example. So Scappoose has about 25 acres of land that is developed with churches, and that's about 2.8 acres of land, 2.8 acres of land per 1,000 people. So for growth over the 2023 period, that would be almost 7 acres more, and then for growth over the 2043 to 73 period, that would be about 11 acres of land, 11.4 acres of land. So we're looking at that much growth in land over the 20 and the 30-year periods. And so that's assuming that churches continue to occupy about the same amount of land per population. And then you've got a group of other type of semi-public land. And Nicole, can you remind me what kind of uses are in there?
These were for the fraternal uses, and I think that Scappoose had cemetery in this category, and then there was also senior citizen. One of the parcels I think was owned by a senior citizens, and then another one was good.
So those kind of nonprofits who really aren't counted in the same way in the forecast of employment growth. So a little bit of land for that as well. So that's where we're coming up with the estimates of land need for public and semi-public lands.
We'll go NJ.
Kim Holmes.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Just wanted to revisit the land need for the parks if we could. So you had estimated 5.4 acres per 1,000 residents. And is that the best practice standard for acres per 1,000 residents?
So this isn't work that we did. This is work that a consultant did for the Parks Master Plan. I expect that they did look at best practices, but I can't really speak to the details of what they did.
Okay, I guess I'm looking at the National Recreation and Park Association. They're recommending 9.9 acres of parkland for every 1,000 residents. And if you look at the American Planning Association, they're estimating 10 acres per 1,000 residents. So I guess I would maybe ask that kind of baseline of best practices be looked into.
And so I think that question would have to be taken to a different committee who's working with this. Laurie?
And Beth, I guess just for clarification so that I know too, in other words, whatever gets adopted as level of service in this plan is what we need to use in our UGB analysis. So yeah, so I think, Kim, that MIG, is it MIG doing this plan? That we would have to direct that question towards them to have them respond to that, because the Parks Committee has been working on this for how long? 6 months-ish. So they've gotten through this part so far. So I don't know what conversations went on to get to this level of service that I assume the Parks and Rec committee who's reviewing this has already weighed in on, but we could certainly reach out and maybe have them.
It may also be that they haven't accounted for things like regional parks, which some larger cities also include. I didn't see regional parks in here, and that there's probably reasons that they haven't accounted for that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I guess if we could just check in on that process to see what they're using as their best practice, that would be great. And I guess Jeanette, being the liaison to that group, if you could maybe make sure that there's some cross-pollination there, that would be great.
Will do.
Thanks.
Jeanette nodded her head, so.
Thank you.
Joe?
Joe Backus, Caboose. So by looking at this, though, you're saying we have enough land in undeveloped parks. So to build new parks south of town, which we have no parks south, we would then have to transfer property out of those parks to accommodate. I mean, we're going to develop those parks, correct? I mean, it says we don't need any additional land.
It says based on the forecast of growth for the next 20 years that you have enough land to accommodate your parks.
Through developing the parks that we've already owned.
I think through developing the land we own. Yeah.
So Grabhorn, Vista, Creekview. So what about south of town where there's no parks?
And so that would be a discussion that's appropriate for the parks planning process. I'm not sure what discussion they've had about that.
But to add those, we would be purchasing land versus transferring. I mean, we're not going to sell Vista to buy property somewhere else, most likely, or Grabhorn or.
Because they don't necessarily take into consideration the geography of the park. We have
No.
land, and so everybody might have to go up to that 60 acres to be in the park.
I would just say too that the Parks Master Plan is a 20-year look, whereas we're looking at 50 years overall for at least housing and employment for sure. So hopefully we don't wait the full 20 years, but hopefully, say in 15 years, we're revisiting this. At that point, we'll see kind of what the population forecasts are looking at, and we could potentially then say, especially if we've had a UGB expansion, that we need to acquire property in these new areas, and that would get updated, halfway through our longer 50-year look. At which point, the Parks Master Plan is going to be a guiding document for park acquisition, whereas this is looking at a much higher level. But whatever does go into this Parks Master Plan is what we would have to use in this plan. So for sure, we would want to, get some answers to your questions on that.
Jeanette?
I'm just letting you guys know, the working with MIG, it's been, I guess the planning stages is a little behind.
Okay.
So we're not, it was a little hold back a little bit. So I believe they're still assessing all of these numbers,
Okay.
what I recall. And so what the master plan comes in will be injected into this plan, right? So this is not the final numbers. That's what I'm saying.
Jeanette,
I don't think they're the final numbers.
we coordinated with MIG.
Okay.
And so they gave us numbers that they'd had updated.
Since when?
I think it was in December. They gave us these numbers in January, I think.
In late December.
So late December. And if they update the numbers, then we'll update this.
Okay.
We're certainly, I expect they'll be further along in their process and more solid in their process before we're at the point where we have to know exact numbers.
Right. Okay. That's what I wanted. So if they adjust it, you'll adjust it here. Yeah.
Yep.
It's a tiny question, just from Kim. If they didn't use what the average is supposed to be, the national average per 1,000, would we adjust that accordingly, or is this what our variable should be?
I think that is a question for the Parks Committee.
Mm-hmm.
And so, national averages are national averages. They may be a good idea, but they're going to look at some types of parks that probably aren't in here. And so what's appropriate for Scappoose? And I'm assuming that project is asking those questions. So I don't want to commit to them.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I've got a question about the semi-public land. Is there a national average number for?
Gosh, no.
Okay.
That's quick.
No, I've done enough of these, and it really varies by community. The acres per 1,000 people. So yeah. And that's why you look at not the vacant land, but the developed land for churches. In acres per 1,000 people, and then the other semi-public, that's a little bit less common, but still a little bit of that kind of need. We don't have fraternal organizations in quite the same way that we did before, but we certainly have cemeteries. And it's possible that we may have a new cemetery. So yeah, but it very, very much varies. I would imagine that if you looked at for the whole state of Oregon, acres per 1,000 people is maybe different for churches than, say, Georgia, which is, has very different levels of church attendance. So
I had a question. So on the church current acres, I assume is that using all the land that the Baptist church is on, because it's a very tiny church on a huge piece of land. And then if we are using that Baptist church plot as being used by that church, then it's inflating our current acres, which is also in turn inflating our future needs.
I don't know the answer to that. Do you know what the name of the Baptist church is? Anybody?
Is it Creekside? I think it's Creekside Baptist.
Good job, Joe.
And the church itself is like tiny.
Well, we can look into that. And
literally, I think I saw an article on them a couple of years ago, and I think they have 100 or so members. It's just like that property is going to be available for some sort of redevelopment, either for a church or for other uses. So if we're using, that's a third of our church land in town with a tiny number of members. So it's inflating the numbers up on our church land current needs. It's also inflating our future needs.
In reality, though, it just means potentially we'd have more of a UGB expansion or more of an urban reserve set aside.
But-
So
but my concern would be is if we're setting aside land for churches, then that. the best-
No,
well, no,
we're not setting aside land for churches specifically.
it's straight acreage.
Okay, I'm sorry. We're setting aside acreage for under that type of, I assume there would be a designation for zoning.
How about I continue on
No.
with the discussion? And I'll make it a little bit clearer because yes and no.
Okay. Didn't see it.
We'll jump
Page,
ahead.
page one is the end summary, right?
That's where we're going to in just a few moments.
354
Okay.
acres is just.
Yeah.
We haven't sorted out different plan designations, and it varies between our urban growth boundary expansion and an urban reserve. So
The buildup is incredible, Beth.
I know, so much tension. Okay, so I'm gonna hop on to
Housing, want to do housing? Housing, the next one?
employment. We're going to jump onto employment. So what we did is, since we offered the economic opportunities analysis, we authored it, not offered it. We have updated the economic opportunities analysis to reflect the 50-year forecast. So you can look in that to see some of the details of which we are summarizing here. And we've got a link to the new EOA, which the change in it is really about the 50-year forecast. So what we did is we took the employment forecast and we said, okay, instead of just 2023 to 43, we added on a 43 to 73. And we selected a growth rate for that 30-year period that was consistent with the forecast for population growth rate for the through 2073. And we did that because some tenants in forecasting, the smaller your area for forecast, and Scappoose is small, and the longer your forecast, and a 30 to 50-year forecast is long, the larger your uncertainty. And so we said, gosh, 2.3% average annual growth rate over a 50-year period seems less likely. And so we went with a growth rate that was consistent with employment, with population. And that's why we went down to the 1.02% for that 30-year period. So that's how fast population is expected to grow in Scappoose between 2043 and 73. A little bit more conservative than our 20-year forecast, but it reflects the greater uncertainty over a 50-year period. Do you have a comment? I see you. All right.
Just eager.
All right. And so that's how we ended up with that. And I'll step forward, and if there are questions, people will ask me. And then we used all the other same assumptions in the EOA, which you can look through the revised EOA to see. And we came out with over, what do you see? 2043 to 73, the land demand here is the forecast of land need for that 30-year period. So I'm just going to hop to commercial. We started off with a 21-acre deficit in commercial land in 2043. You add to that another 62-acre deficit for commercial land. And then by 2073, you have a 83-acre deficit. With industrial, you start with a 301-acre surplus. You subtract from that 93 acres, and you get a 208-acre surplus by the end of 2073. And so what we're saying is that you need an additional 62 acres to address your commercial land needs over that 43 to 73 period. So that means that you'd need some land in your urban reserve to address commercial land needs. But you don't need urban reserve land for industrial land needs because you've got enough land in your urban growth boundary based on our forecast. And yeah.
Glenn?
I hate to be conflicting, but back when the annexation of the airport was done, and Lori will confirm this, the amount of employment at the airport was between 6,000 and 7,000 in projection. The transportation at the airport was about 1,900 vehicles on Crown Road. So all of this information is totally in contrast to the annexation process that was done by the city for the airport. How do we coincide these two relationships? How do you say this is wrong, this is right, when the city has already said, we're going to have this and we have an allocation of this. We have this much land and we have a zoning that will allow it. We have a transportation system that will allow it. To go back and say, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. Are you saying that the airport should be condemned? Are you saying that there should be restrictive covenants not allow the process that was initially proposed and agreed upon and joined with the city? Okay, I find this very confusing and very frustrating.
So we're saying that the growth at the airport is going to grow forecast from what we know right now at a slower rate than the forecast that was done about a decade ago. And so we're not suggesting any changes to policies at the airport. If the employment at the airport grows faster than has been happening over the last decade, then that certainly can be accommodated when you update your economic opportunities analysis next. And you could look at expanding your urban reserves further at that point. So at some point here, you're certainly going to want to conduct another economic opportunities analysis, preferably before you're starting to get much, too far into all of your airport land. And then you'll have a new fact base in order to base a new forecast off of. So what we're saying, Glenn, is that the airport's going to build out slower than was expected. And if it it builds out faster, then the city turns to a new planning process for this. What we're saying also is that we know the city has a deficit of commercial land, and over the 50 years, it's going to continue to grow that deficit of commercial land. So once we get to talking about housing growth, it'll be important that the city is planning for new housing, that it's also planning for commercial to coincide with some of that housing.
Is that commercial deficit, assuming that we continue to allow apartments to go into commercially zoned land in new areas?
Yes, it's yes, yes, but the exact relationship is it becomes a little bit hard to tease out. But since that's built into what we're talking about, is all of that 62 acres going to necessarily be for commercial, or will some of that 62 acres be for apartments also? And the way that when we look at urban reserves, it's based on different land needs, like a commercial land need or a residential land need, but you don't designate land. You don't say, we're going to bring in, this piece of land here for commercial and this piece of land here for residential. You say, we're going to bring in this piece of land and this piece of land, and some of it will be commercial and some of it will be residential. And those things will be decided when you do a urban growth boundary expansion.
Make sure I get this, because this is a big one for me.
Mm-hmm.
So we're actually, the urban reserves would just say, this is future land we're going to use for something.
Yes.
And urban reserves are not designating commercial, residential, what have.
Parks. Yes, that is correct.
Wow, okay.
And
Something today.
you're specifically not allowed to do those kind of designations.
Okay.
You might have planning in the back of your mind where when we're looking at an urban growth boundary expansion and we need more of X and such land, this is probably more suited for, commercial than low density residential, for instance.
So now, so once it goes into this reserve,
Mhm.
it's just in the reserve as kind of a bucket reserve,
Yes.
lack of a better way of putting it. And in the future, as land is needed for a specific use, be it commercial, residential, high density residential, then at that point, the city or an applicant would request that land come in to the city?
You have to do an urban growth boundary expansion
Okay.
for that. And the advantage to having an urban reserve is when we go through the urban growth boundary expansion, some of you are going to look at me like I'm insane for what we're doing, because there is a priority scheme, or where do you bring land in? Okay, all right. And so what the urban reserves does for you is it says the first priority is urban reserve land and exceptions areas. So areas that are already pre-developed, essentially. And so those are the first priority. And if you have land in those, you don't have to look beyond that. So your urban growth boundary expansion process is greatly simplified.
Now, the urban reserves, when we're selecting land to go into that, once we have a bucket of acres that we need, is that still operate under the traditional Oregon land use law, where like we're supposed to use RR5 ahead of farmland and such, or is this more of a free for all?
It is not a free-for-all, and we haven't discussed this, but our recommendation would be in the city's urban growth management agreement with the county, that there's some agreement that the type of development that can happen might be like 10-acre residential. So you can't, divide things up into smaller chunks than 10 acres, unless it already is, of course. So that you maintain land that can be reasonably developed in the future.
So you would make a recommendation that, say somebody had a 50-acre parcel somewhere, they wouldn't be able to chop it up into 5-acre parcels.
That would, and I don't know if it's 5 acres, if it's 10 acres, if,
So
whatever.
would that mean that if somebody had a RR5 land that they hadn't partitioned, that they would be prevented from partitioning it?
That is a lot of discussion that has not happened.
Okay.
And so I can't answer
It's all
the.
important things, because it would impact people in our community.
Yeah, you want to make sure not to take away development opportunities while still maintaining as large chunks of land as you can, so it can be urbanized in the future. So it's all gonna be discussed.
Okay.
All right. So were there other questions about the forecast?
About the employment, anyone?
So then we're gonna head into housing. And so what we did is we looked at the housing needs analysis document, and this doesn't look quite so much like what the housing needs analysis looks like, but all the assumptions are consistent with that. So based on the population growth through 2073, we're looking at 1,732 more dwelling units. And all these assumptions are consistent with the housing needs analysis. And so if you have questions about the assumptions, that's more questions for that team than for our team. But that's how we came to the 1732. And then what we did with that is we looked at, in the housing needs analysis, the percent of housing that was in low density and medium density and high density. And we said, we'll divide the 1732 based on the same percentages. So it's consistent with what the housing needs analysis assumed. And then we used the future densities that were used in the housing needs analysis. And that's how we got to land need. So 999 dwelling units in low density divided by 6 dwelling units per acre is 168 acres of land. In the housing needs analysis, it showed you had a surplus of 38 acres. So 168 minus 38 is 130. And so that's how we came to all of these numbers. I know it's a lot of math that made, my head hurt. I'm sorry, I'm joking with you. So at least we're consistent across the board with what they're assuming. We didn't try to change the housing needs analysis because it's not our document. So we documented all of that in this memo that you have. And then when we put that all together, we've got these deficits for public and semi-public, for employment and for housing. So when you talk about the employment and the housing, we know the employment is primarily commercial and that the housing is a mix of all of the different types of housing. Our next step here is to fit the public and semi-public into the same sorts of categories of land that's either, it could be industrial, but I don't think much of your public and semi-public is an industrial. It could be in commercial, and then it could be in the residential designations. So I expect to fit a certain amount of public and semi-public under employment, which is commercial, and a certain amount under housing. And we just need to look at what's there now, and we just haven't taken that step. So so the 2023 numbers these numbers might change a little bit, the deficits. And specifically that's related to the fact that you have a surplus of land of 38 acres in low density. So it may well shift some of those numbers around. But for right now, approximately over the 50-year period, we're looking about 354 acres of deficit. And so that would be the size of your urban growth boundary expansion, if you have one, and your urban reserves. And your urban reserves at about 290 acres. I'm a little more certain of that one.
I'm sorry, the urban reserves are how many acres?
About 290,
Oh, so the
280.
vast majority is the urban reserve.
Yep. Yep. The thing I can speak about less definitively is exactly what we'd be looking at under an urban growth boundary expansion. We just need to work these numbers in a little bit better. And then the next step is looking at what can we do to use land within the city's urban growth boundary more efficiently. So when you have a deficit of land, as we have, you have to look at land use efficiency measures. And then if you still don't have enough land, an urban growth boundary expansion. And so we've got that that next step that will be coming when we talk next in April.
So is that like higher densities against and that kind of thing?
It builds right off of the measures to accommodate needed housing memo. And then when we look at commercial, there's a whole lot fewer land use efficiency measures around commercial, but we'll be looking at some of them. You could look at, are there opportunities to rezone some land? And if you rezone land that's commercial, and this would have to be, I would suggest it be with the landowner's agreement. If you rezone land that's housing, how does that affect the residential deficit? Takes land out of that pot and puts it into the commercial.
So there will be an opportunity to identify land that maybe is currently zoned commercial and move it to residential or vice versa. Is that correct or no?
That is part of our next step.
Okay.
And I don't think we envision going through a map step by step with this group. But if you have particular suggestions, then what I would suggest is we talk about them with Laurie.
Okay.
And I think that there's a lot of other considerations that need to go into that, like what the landowner prefers. And of course, you never want to downzone land. So you never want to take land, say, that is high density residential and zone it down to low density residential unless your landowner agrees, because that leaves the city open to being sued under Measure 49.
The good news is we don't have very much A1 high density zoned land.
Or commercial land,
Anyway.
downzoning commercial land or zoning land suddenly for industrial where the owner doesn't want that.
Right.
So that is where we are going, and I'm happy to step back for any of the other questions. And we'll also be starting to, at the all-town meeting, we'll be starting to explain to the public some of what we'll be doing in the next steps. So, there are questions? I expect these numbers to move around a little bit, probably at least 2 times.
Any questions online? Looks like there's a hand up. Is that Kim?
All right, yeah.
Yep, hi. So when making the case for a UBG expansion, how far are you able to project out time-wise? Is it standard using a 20-year projection?
It's a 20-year projection specifically.
Okay, so the first ask would be the 66 acres with kind of the understanding that we could be asking for more in the next round.
For the urban reserves, yeah. And that 66 acres, don't get too attached to it. I'm almost positive it's going to change some. And it'll probably go down some from land use efficiency measures, but it'll change in some interesting ways as we look at different measures.
Okay, but a 20-year forecast.
20-year forecast. That
Thank
one
you.
I'm sure of.
Can you help me understand? The urban reserves are supposed to make it easier in the future to bring land into the city. How do they actually do that?
So shall I take the first?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Please.
So one, in 30 years, we'll say, when the city's ready for another urban growth boundary expansion. I'm just skipping the next 20. When you do your urban growth boundary expansion analysis, you get to stop at priority 1 land, because it's urban reserve land, or exceptions areas. So you know over the next 20 years where you're going. So as you're doing your facilities planning, and you think, let's just posit that there's an urban reserve somewhere down south. And let's say that in year 15 here, the city puts in a bigger water pipe somewhere to down south, and we know that there'll be more development down south. Does the city choose to put in a 8-inch pipe or a 20-inch pipe that'll eventually serve that whole area? And in doing so with the 20-inch pipe, obviously you spend more now, but then you don't have to replace that 8-inch pipe, X years down the line. So you have efficiencies in public facilities also.
So, okay, so there's efficiencies in public facilities. I understand that concept.
That's
What I'm saying is, as far as,
The process itself.
yeah, how does it make it simpler?
So I think what Beth, there's less analysis involved because once you have your urban reserves designated,
You don't have to pick the site, you're saying is basically.
it's just there. You know that that's where you're going.
So you're
Yeah.
basically just have to show a need. And then
That's correct.
then if you have the need, that's the site.
you have to pick amongst the sites.
Right.
So if we have 300 acres of urban reserves and you need a 30-acre expansion, then you have to choose 30 acres of that 300 acres.
Got it.
Based on the type of land you're needing to bring in.
I brought this up at a previous meeting, and I don't know if you've given any thought to it, Lori. I was concerned that in the short term, could actually retard economic development, because the way the city has in the past done sewer and water lines is you develop something, you build a line, you build the road, you build the water
Yeah, I
sewer
remember
line,
you asking.
that's sufficient for given the city's long-term planning. And I could see somebody with a couple acres somewhere being told they need to put in a 12-inch water line when without the urban reserves, they'd only need an 8, and suddenly their costs go through the roof. Have you given any thought how we could mitigate this? So it doesn't
I
hurt
think
our long.
it's our,
short-term growth?
again, it's our master plans that are going to dictate that. And those have just been updated and will be good for technically 20 years, although we should be looking at to update them before that. And so I would say it would get captured in the master plans at the time of the next update, in which case we would show that need. It probably wouldn't seem so outlandish if, compared to today. Yeah. If we're closer to that end date when we would need that larger pipe size.
Okay.
And maybe the city chooses, by policy to pay for the difference between an 8 and 12-inch pipe and then
yeah, what
charges new development.
What I had suggested previously is that maybe something, I don't know the right place for it or whatever, is that a developer of a property that is impacted by the urban reserves would be allowed to use their SDCs to pay for any upgrades above what would be needed outside of the urban reserves. Meaning, so you're
Correct.
developing,
Sure.
because it seems like it could hurt development in the short run with the idea of making things easier in the long run, unless that was done. Now, if the city didn't feel comfortable with making that commitment, then it makes me concerned that some of the benefits of having the urban reserve may not be sufficient to justify the reduction of economic development in the city.
And the other thing too is we typically, now these urban reserve areas are going to be outside of the city's boundary and outside the UGB. And so we wouldn't extend or ask a developer to extend public services outside of the UGB.
No,
But granted, I understand the concept that there may be a line heading in that direction that's inside city limits that it would apply to. But again, I do feel that our master plans are going to pick that up. That's all we can ask you to build to is what's in a current master
And
plan.
it's not going to be impacted for like at least 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it seems like that's an area that would be rich for some policy. And I of course would, this is stepping out of my area of expertise when we talk about financing and building infrastructure, but it seems like a policy about, what you require development to pay for being commensurate with what that development needs.
Correct. Yeah.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions? So Laurie, I think that that APG MIG recently resubmitted a new measures to accommodate housing, unneeded housing memo to the to you.
I did get the housing capacity analysis updated, and I believe we got the measures as well. Mhm.
And so I think this group has talked with MIG about those measures to accommodate housing need. Am I
Yes.
right about
Yeah,
that?
they have.
And so I think that what I'm asking essentially is before our next meeting, if you can make sure that that's posted to the website, and so this group can review the final version of that. I don't want you to be surprised by any of the land use efficiency measures that we're taking that are right out of that, because I believe that those are things that you've discussed and thought those should be considered for further consideration.
They were presented to the committee, I will say that, and there was conversation about some of the concepts and feedback. So, and then we can share those meeting minutes with your
Great.
group so that you have an understanding of what the conversation was. But also we can make sure that's posted and provide a link so that this group can, just refresh their memory because it's been a little while since we looked
Okay.
at that.
And so not everything in that memo is necessarily a land use efficiency measure. Some of those things may be other policies that aren't using your land more efficiently. And so those might not be something that come up in the next set of discussions. But that's where we're drawing on the initial ideas for potential land use efficiency measures. And we'll be working with staff. And then, talking to you all and seeing if those measures make sense to you. And then eventually, as Larry was saying, getting feedback from the Planning Commission and the City Council, and let's say some measure made sense to everybody, then we'd start to figure it into the land need, which will change land need, and start development code updates through this project. That's sort of how that part would work.
Yeah, and you'll recall there weren't a whole lot of changes that were recommended as far as to residential codes, just because we had done some very heavy lifting in 2018 in that respect. So it was more of just looking for just refinements on what we already have, I would say. So it really wasn't anything super outlandish because I suggested that would not go over well. So, but absolutely, yeah, we'll look at those again and get started on that work.
Honestly, I've only read over that memo once, very briefly. So, and that's all I have for this evening.
Okay. And the next meeting April 25th.
April 25th.
So it's not on the agenda, but March. April 25th for this meeting, and then the town hall is Saturday, April 8th.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you again, Beth. And
Certainly. Thank you all.
everyone. Thank you for everyone for coming, and Lori and Jay. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. And thank you for showing up.
Meeting's adjourned.
Hi, everyone.
At every meeting.